Going to be taking a look at the process of utilizing Google Dorks, or Google hacking as it's known as by hackers and penetration testers, to essentially identify information pertinent to a target. And in this case, we're going to be primarily focusing on domains as our targets, right? So we're essentially going to be taking a look at how to utilize search filters, Google search filters, to find exactly what we're looking for. This will include specific subdomains, specific files associated with a target. Like maybe we wanted to find PDF files for that are publicly available for a particular domain, etc., etc. You get the idea. You'll actually see what this looks like when we get started. So again, I'm going to be utilizing my Kali Linux VM, and of course you can follow along if you want to as well. Just remember, be very careful with what you actually engage with, because as you'll see, there is quite a lot of content you can find online that is unsecured and could be potentially useful as as a penetration tester. So let me just switch over. All right, so I am back on my Kali Linux system, and we can get started. So I'm just going to open up Google because that's what we're dealing with, and then we'll actually walk through it, right? So there we are, google.com. So let's say our target is ine.com. So a standard person who is unenlightened might just type in ine.com, right? Fairly simple. So we type in ine.com. You can see we have ine.com here, their LinkedIn page, Twitter. Okay, that's looking okay. But, this is really not giving me information that might be useful to me, right? With regards to this particular domain. So let's say I wanted to limit all results to this particular domain. To do that, I can utilize the site operator, and I'm just going to zoom in here. So I'll say site:/ine.com. All right, now you'll see what will happen. So as you can see, it will now limit all results to specific, it'll limit all the results to the domain ine.com, but not just that. It'll also show you subdomains for this particular domain here. So you can see we have my.ine.com, we have ine.com here. These are all the pages or categories for the ine.com website. So you can see we have blog, careers. So we are already starting to actually identify potentially interesting pages, and not just that, but potentially interesting subdomains. Like, for example, they have courses.ine.com, they have community.ine.com, so on and so forth. But this is still very wide with regards to the scope, right? We can pretty much go through all of these pages and identify subdomains that might be interesting, like this one here, although I'm not telling you to do that. But let's say we wanted to look for specific results, and we want to limit it to ine.com. But let's say within the website title or within the website URL, let's say we were looking for an admin panel. Well, we could say in URL, so that's the next search filter. We can say admin. Will this show us an admin panel? Well, it shows us a Microsoft 365 Teams admin page, which looks like a course. Nothing to do with admin. Let's see if we can find anything there. We have another page here. But yeah, we pretty much don't have anything there. So that's a bummer. So we can see we have the forum. By the way, we can also change this to forum. If we were looking for an INE forum, we can just type in URL forum. And there we go. We get links pertinent to, the actual search queries we have provided. So you can see that the forum is community.ine.com. So we've been able to identify that conclusively. Now, let's say we were looking for things that are a little bit interesting. What if we wanted to enumerate subdomains via Google? Well, we could do that. And the way we can do that is by saying site, and we then use the wildcard symbol or the asterisk, and we say site:**, and then .ine.com. This will not show ine.com, but it'll show subdomains for ine.com. So I'll hit enter, and as you can see now we're getting somewhere. So we have my.ine.com, courses.ine.com. So this is essentially what Sublister was doing. It was essentially utilizing Dorks for all the search engines to limit the results to subdomains. And these are, of course, subdomains that have been indexed by Google. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, aren't these the subdomains that, INE has exposed by their own choice? Well, that's true. That is the case. But in some cases, companies can become very sloppy and they may expose a subdomain to the internet that, they probably don't want to expose. And in many cases, some companies don't even know that these subdomains are accessible via Google. So let's take a look and let's see. Oh, looks like we have the same remote desktop one there. Let's take a look at some of the other ones. Okay, we have shop.ini courses. We've already seen that, but we still aren't getting anything interesting. Nothing interesting so far. So let's try and make this a little bit. Let's try and make our search a little bit more refined. So I can say in URL, we can say maybe admin. Let's say we're looking for a subdomain that has admin in its URL. In this case, that might not be very useful, so we can use the in title operator or filter. That will essentially limit all the results to subdomains with admin within the actual site title. So I'll hit enter, and we have a sales admin, which looks like the subdomain is stgacp.ini. This looks like a CRM. So you can already see that just by utilizing the Google search engine and utilizing Google Docs, we can start finding subdomains manually. And of course, this is something that Sublister would do, but it's very important that you learn how to do this yourself. Now, why am I saying that? Well, let's say we wanted to find, we can say, let's limit it to subdomains of ini.com, but we wanted to find files. So we can say file type, and then we specify the type of file. So let's say PDFs, right? So you can start to see that now it's going to limit the results to, subdomains that have PDFs or pages, or subdomains with pages that have PDFs. So in this case, it looks like we have a diagram here. Network diagram. Okay, interesting. Let's try and limit this maybe to sales. Let's see. Nothing there. So nothing useful there. Can we say CRM maybe? Okay, nothing there. Maybe marketing. Nothing there. Okay, so you can see that we probably need to make our search query a bit more specific, or we pretty much do not have anything, or we didn't get anything returned by Google. So let's try and limit this to XLSX files or Excel spreadsheet files. Nothing there. Okay, that's good. Maybe PDF. We've already done PDF. So can we say documents? So doc or docx. Nothing there. Maybe zip. I believe zip still works, or .zip, but you get the idea. So we can limit it to specific files. So if we say, PDF, or maybe X, we can say file type :XLSX. And instead of searching for subdomains, we just search for, we limit the results to ini.com. In this case, nothing there. So maybe docx. Okay, so Google has, of course, detected that we are making too many requests. Good on them. We are making too many requests. Taxis, I believe that's all the taxis I can see there. So, okay, that looks like it's working. So, yeah, nothing there. All right, so that is how to essentially, limit or how to perform subdomain enumeration manually. Now, one other thing that, we can do, for example, if we're looking for information regarding, employees, for example, we can say site ini.com, and then we can say employees. So we can enter a standard search query here. So we can say site ini.com employees, and you can see we get results based on the actual keyword that we specified there. So, if we were trying to look for employees or individuals that work at INE, this would be one of the ways we can do it. So you can see that you can limit it to what information you're looking for specifically. So there we are. We can also say maybe, let's see, ini.com, maybe instructors. And this will probably display, there we are. So we have the instructors page. So you get the idea. You can pretty much search for whatever you're looking for by utilizing Google Docs. Now, let me take you through a couple of examples that might not be too good to show you, but if we were looking maybe for sites with directory listing enabled, we can use the in title search filter and specify that within the title we're looking for index off. All right, so this is a common vulnerability within web servers. So if you're familiar with how web servers work, or if you've ever set one up, there is a misconfiguration called directory listing. Now, it's not really a misconfiguration, but you really rarely want to have this open or running on a production site. The reason for that is because it allows users to view the contents of that directory. So in this case, it looks like we have a couple of sites that are hosting probably pirated movies. So I wouldn't recommend clicking on that. And you can see that nothing else there. It's not displaying anything else there. So next, we have a couple of other sites. There we go. But yeah, you get the idea. If I was to show you how this works, if I click on, maybe this looks like a government website, so index of data, that's probably secured. But let's click on that. No, it isn't. So it looks like they have data that's publicly exposed. I'm not really sure what this data is. It looks like, yeah, I'm not going to click on that. Anyway, this is publicly available, accessible information. But again, I'm just doing this for educational purposes. There are a couple of other searches we can perform that I haven't covered here. But let's say we wanted to try and find an older version of a website. This is very important because companies can modify websites and are constantly making changes to website. So if you wanted to see what a website looked maybe 5 months ago or maybe 1 year ago, you can use the cache operator and then specify the site itself. So cache.ini.com, and we'll give this a couple of seconds. And again, looks like I have the same issue. So boats. Okay, do I see any more boats there? Verify. Okay, Google will probably allow us to do that. So there we are. So that'll display the Google Web Cache for ini.com. And in this case, it looks like we don't have any, this is pretty much the latest version. We can also utilize the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine is a site that stores older versions of websites. So it essentially takes a snapshot of a website after a fixed period of time, and it stores those snapshots. So I can say https ini.com. And it's going to take a second. There we are. So it's taken snapshots all the way from 1999. So we can see the earliest version of this website. So I'll click on the snapshot maybe on the 9th of February. This is very close to when I was born, which is kind of scary actually. But there we are. Let's see how the website looks. It looks like it's saying, welcome to the Great Web of China. Okay, I'm guessing that's before INE actually set it up for its current use case. Let's see how it looked in 2006. So let's see how it looked on August the 3rd. This is really cool. So the snapshot was taken 2200 hours. Let's click on that one there. All right, this is 2006. So I'm expecting it to be, well, that snapshot doesn't really make any sense. Let's take a look at a more recent one, maybe 2016, right? That's probably where things started getting really interesting. So maybe March the 12th, 2016. All right, so we can start to see how the website looked then. Okay, so you can see we already have in the title, we have a CCIE training. So I'm just going to give this a second, a couple of seconds to load up. All right, so if you ever wanted to know how a site looked in 2016, like for example, INE.com, this is how it looked like. So the Wayback Machine is really cool because, it gives you a sort of a historical view of what a website looked like. Let me show you something even cooler than that. I'll show you what hackersploit.org looked like during its inception. So hackersploit.org. I know that we really had a very, very bad theme right around 2018 when I first set the site up. So let's take a look at April the 20th, 2018. Not really sure what to expect, but this had a different title, Hackersploit Cybersecurity. Okay, let's see what that looked like, because I think I've even forgotten that myself. So yeah, we'll just give this a couple of seconds because it needs to, fetch that content and then of course render it so that we can view the web page. All right, so this is how hackersploit.org looked. Nothing too different, but the theme definitely has changed. But you can sort of get an idea as to how this would be useful. So a good example of this is I'll give you a personal example or a personal analogy. Is when I was performing a pen test for a company that I can't name. They had information that was potentially useful for attackers on one of on an older version of their site, probably a few probably 4 or 5 years in the past, and they thought that that information was not accessible by anyone. And with the Wayback Machine we could go ahead and view it, and there was a lot of sensitive information that was leaked. So you can definitely take a look at the Wayback Machine to get a historical view of what a website looked like, and of course that's not just why you should be doing it. Is because older version of website might have potentially important information like email addresses, contact information, etc. So let's head back over to google.com, and I'll probably explore a few more Google Docs that we can use, or that you can use rather, if you're ever trying to find interesting stuff. So another example of this is, let's say we wanted to see if some website has inadvertently, listed or, saved or exposed a directory that has passwords. A lot of people do that. So we can, for example, say in URL, and in this case we can say auth user file.txt, and you can already see that a few sites have them. So for example, this one here, which is just an IP address, and they probably have this exposed on the internet, and that means that there's a login form here. There's probably the password. The passwords are probably leaked on this page. I'm not going to get into that because again, that'll be sort of going over what I'm allowed to do. But looks like we have another one here, and it looks like the same site. Interesting, very, very interesting. Let's change this around. I think there's another one we can use. So we can say in URL password.txt, or maybe in title password.txt. So it looks like we have a couple of sites that have leaked their password.txt file on the internet. Let's take a look at this one here. That's the Etsy password file. And hopefully these individuals or the owners of this website here haven't inadvertently leaked this information to the public. But there you go. You can see that there is password information, or at least usernames for a specific domain here. But you get the idea. You can do a lot with Google Docs. Now, I've not covered all of the most important ones because I'm really focused on passive enumeration or passive information gathering. One of the greatest resources for whenever you're trying to utilize Google Docs or perform Google hacking is the Google Hacking Database, right? Which is owned by Offensive Security, the parent company that owns and develops Kali Linux. So this is a database of Google Docs that can allow you to find specific information. So for example, in this case, this Google Doc can be used to find files that contain juicy information. So these are government sites. So you can see we have site gov.whatever, in title index of, because directory listing is enabled, and the file type is CSV. So we can actually test this out. Let's see if we actually find some juicy files, which of course we will, because people don't take the time to secure their stuff. So there we are. A lot of sites here. And these all look like government sites for different governments. And as I said, I'm not going to be going through this, but you can see that they're all being leaked because directory listing is enabled. Most of these are WordPress sites, which makes a lot of sense because WordPress can be quite hard to lock down. But yeah, you can also limit this to, you can specify additional keywords to find what you're looking for. So maybe you can say passwords. There we are. And in this case, that would limit it to, any URL with the gov.prefix, yeah, so you can utilize the Google Hacking Database to find specific information. So let's take a look at a couple of others. that might be potentially interesting. These are the latest ones here. Let's run a few filters. So let's say we're looking for files containing passwords, probably. There we are, files containing passwords. We can then utilize these particular docs or search filters to look for files that contain passwords. So we can use this one, for example, here, or maybe this one here. Let's see whether we're able to find any credentials that might have been leaked. There we are. You can see that we might have a few here. So this looks like a potentially interesting website. And that is, I probably won't check them because I don't want to do that. But yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with the Google search engine through the use of Google Docs. I've just gone through some of the most interesting ones that you can do from the perspective of a penetration tester, legally speaking, sort of limiting the results to a particular URL or a particular title or particular domain or subdomain. So definitely take a look at the Google hacking database. As I said, this is pretty much a one-stop shop if you're ever trying to find potentially interesting files or potentially incriminating files that a company might not have secured with regards to their website. So definitely take a look at this, especially if they have a WordPress site. Then you can limit this again by using the filter option to a particular content management system, or you can just perform a search, maybe like WordPress. There we are. And in this case, we can also limit this to maybe WordPress. There we are. And these are all the Google Docs for WordPress. So you can try and find WordPress, WordPress config backup files. This is something that I've used before. So let me just take a step back here. So, sites that have taken a backup of their WordPress config file and have not deleted that backup. If you're not familiar with it, the WordPress config file pretty much contains credentials to the MySQL database. So, this could be potentially damning for a particular company. But yeah, that concludes the practical demonstration side of this video.